I thought I'd try a different type of video today. Rather than doing my old fitness content, I thought I would try and do something different. I've always been a big fan of RPGs, and so I recently obtained the boxed set for the second edition of the Mouse Guard Roleplaying Game, created by Luke Crane and David Petersen. Luke Crane is the driving force behind the game design. You may know him from Burning Wheel. He also is associated with the game Torchbearer. I also brought, for point of comparison, some of the existing Mouse Guard comics that I have. I basically have the first three, the original trilogy, if you will, of Fall 1152, Winter 1152, and the Black Axe. For those of you who don't know, a quick synopsis of the Mouse Guard series is that it's essentially an order of rangers that are anthropomorphic mice that travel a territory protecting the mice from external threats. It kind of has elements of Redwall, but rather than being directly inspired by Redwall, it's more of a parallel thinking where both of them are drawn from, I believe, The Winds in the Willow and kind of earlier works, and then they have sort of come to a similar idea. But while Redwall is very much Arthurian and a little bit noble, there's kind of an element of prophecy and myth to it. Mouse Guard is a little bit more grounded, gritty, and kind of pedestrian level fantasy. There's actually no magic in this system, but it is still considered fantasy because there are talking animals. Many of these larger predators that you see in the ecosystem end up filling the roles that you would see in a more typical kind of medieval fantasy. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and get the box set cracked open. The first thing I want to say about this box set, if you haven't held it in your hands before, is that it is dense. There's just a weightiness to this that's really satisfying. It also has just kind of a nice sheen to it. This is a new edition, but I think the used editions still hold up pretty well. You can tell that it's a durable material, and it kind of evokes those old puzzle boxes that you played with as kids, where it had this like beautiful piece of artwork on the front, and somehow the puzzle that you put together was always missing two pieces and never quite evoked it. But the nice thing about this is there's no actual puzzle in it, but there are a lot of goodies. So I'm not going to go too much into the mechanics of Mouse Guard just because I think that would make the video too long. But it is a really fun game. It's a very different take on kind of medieval role-playing games than what you would see from a typical more Dungeons & Dragons type thing. The DNA of it is based on the Burning Wheel system, so there's a lot of emphasis on role-play, acts of heroism, playing to a mouse's nature. But I don't want to get too sidetracked by that, so I'm going to go ahead and open the box up. So the first thing you see here is that there are several sets of cards, and these are basically reference cards for the players. There's kind of the assumption that there's going to be, 2 to 4 players, so there's 4 in the box. And then over here we have a set of 6-sided dice. The nice thing about these dice is they basically are broken up into the 3 categories for Mouse Guard. So in Mouse Guard, when you roll a 6-sided die, 1 to 3 is a failure, 4 to 5 is a success, 6 is a success that you can also make into an exploding dice, essentially. These are called swords, snakes, and axes. The snakes are the failure because snakes are a natural predator, so this is a bad thing for the mice. The swords are just a normal success, so a 4 to 5. And then, of course, an axe is a 6 success because that evokes the Black Axe, which is a semi-mythical weapon in the Mouse Guard world. I'm going to go ahead and open this real quick just so you can get a better look at it. So yeah, there's just some beautiful little artwork. I really like this rather than just having a typical numbered dice with maybe one logo on the side, because it's very evocative. And for something like a 6-sided die where you just have 3 sides being the snakes, 2 sides the swords, it works just as well. And honestly, I think it's a little bit easier than having to do number crunching, which I think can become very tedious in gameplay. Now I'm going to go ahead and open the cards. So this box contains 13 weapons and armor cards, 5 conditions cards, 12 actions cards. Rather than having kind of a big reference sheet that the players have to refer to whenever they're doing some of the more detailed mechanical work in the game, they've actually just kind of put it into this neat little deck, which I think is a really great idea because you can hand it out to players and they can basically keep it to themselves, and you don't have to worry too much about sorting through too many paper sheets. So I haven't opened these from the wrapping yet, but there's basically the 3 categories. So right here you can see these are some of the item descriptions. It basically describes how it interacts with different actions. On the back, you have an example of heavy armor. Clearly, this is designed for a mouse rather than a human. Here you have some of the conditions which are very important in the game. Rather than dealing with hit points, most of the damage, quote unquote, that you would take in a game of Mouse Guard is a physical condition that impairs your mouse in various ways. It's just the emphasis away from purely combat to more of like a survival type game, which I think is really interesting. And it's very evocative of the world that David Petersen has built. And then finally, you have a little fun drawing, and these are basically the different actions you take in what's called a conflict. So a conflict is generally combat, but it also is actually an abstraction of a lot of different kinds of conflicts in Mouse Guard. One of the strengths of the system is that you don't actually have a different rule set for dealing with different kind of high stakes situations. So say you're chasing an enemy, fighting them, driving them off, trying to persuade them of something. You use the same basic rules for that, and so it makes things very fun and tactical, and you can kind of mix and match because it's abstracted out enough that you don't have to worry about having a different set of mechanics for everything, which I think is really one of the shining strengths of the system. So the final things in the Mouse Guard book, and I absolutely love these, the final things besides the rule books are a ton of, first off, character sheets. I really like this character sheet. I particularly actually like this little thing right here, where they basically have a rough tracing of a mouse and you can kind of fill in the details. I think having a picture of a character is oftentimes much more useful than having a generic description, just for getting the table to kind of have a better visual imagery while they're playing. And then here's a GM reference sheet. This is basically used as a way to have a quick reference for characters, so you don't really need to ask your players for any sort of information on the characters after you've had them fill this out initially. And it's just a great way to kind of have a quick reference, because so much of this game is built on characters and the NPCs that are associated with these characters and how those characters kind of play off of each other. So this is a really fantastic resource. I love that they included this in the box set. You can tell that when putting together this box set, these are people who've actually played games, and they really have a good understanding of what a GM is going to need. So here is the main book. This is, again, the second edition of Mouse Guard. I really like this cover because it does really kind of tap into the ethos of Mouse Guard, and it has this kind of fantastic wraparound artwork. So one of the advantages of having Mouse Guard being based off of an existing IP is that there's a massive amount of artwork from the graphic novels that has been adapted and lifted into the book. So I don't want to go too into detail with this because, this could be a separate video. But if there is interest in the Mouse Guard 2e second edition rules, I can definitely go through and kind of, go through different pages, point out the artwork, etc. I probably won't go through everything in this book, but I would go through the highlights because it is just a good, dense book with a lot of great GMing tips, no matter what game you're playing, which I always love. I think the best rule books for GMs are the ones that are basically designed as a toolkit. And then here is the one expansion that's official for Mouse Guard, which is New Rules and New Missions. This is just an expansion of the existing rules. It gives you some additional character templates. Most of the pre-generated characters are actually existing characters in the Mouse Guard world, which I think is a lot of fun because it gives you a lot of material to reference. And it's also just kind of interesting to sort of play through. You could potentially play through the Mouse Guard adventures as written if you would want, and sort of play out that meta plot at the table. And then finally, you have a GM screen, which has fantastic artwork. I can't really say enough about this artwork. This is just a beautiful spread. I really love David Petersen's line work. I believe he was a screen printer originally, and you can really see that in kind of how clear and laid out everything is. And then you have this fantastic reference sheet available to the GM. And nice enough, you actually have sort of a back sheet, which you could potentially leave out to the players if you want. The actions that they use for conflicts are actually going to come up frequently. So you may actually want to just have it spread out so that they can see the artwork and these. But either way, you have this nice little fold out, so you have more information. It's very concise. It really covers basically anything that you're not going to be able to remember off the top of your head. So I really appreciate that they've included this as well. It's a very thoughtful edition, and I'm always a fan of a little bit more artwork. I started reading the original books just out of interest in playing the game because I had heard of the game for a while. It's a little bit earlier than kind of the big zeitgeist of RPGs, so I think that it's a little bit slept on by some people who are relatively new to the RPG scene. But everybody I've heard who's played it has really sung its praises. But yeah, so I became interested in reading the graphic novels, and then I just kind of became fascinated by them. At this point, I've read everything that David Petersen's put out that I was able to track down. So that's it as far as the box set goes. But the best part of all, and I think an unsung praise of this box set, is that when I put things together again, it actually closes properly the way that it was assembled. The one pet peeve I have with a lot of these box sets is that when you pull out all the goodies and you start playing with them, you can never get it reassembled again. Where they've given it just enough space that you can pack it in neatly, but you can still fit it on a shelf pretty easily. It's actually not that much wider than the 3 books. You could potentially put them next to each other on a shelf, and it would just be like kind of a nice visual aesthetic for the mouse guard corner of your book and game shelf. If you have any questions or insight about the role-playing game, feel free to just leave that in the comments below, and I hope you like this. It's obviously a departure from my old content, but I really am passionate about it, and I think that I'm going to have a lot of fun just kind of diving into RPGs, which is a hobby I've been into for a long time. Have a good day.